Beloved Rapture is a rather different and yet familiar indie JRPG. You see, the thing about JRPGs nowadays is sometimes they might be made in more modern programs or even with modern RPG makers. And I'm not saying that older RPG makers haven't been used for many a game, there are plenty, but what makes Beloved Rapture interesting is what I'd say not really so much of a rebellion or resistance against modern day design with indie JRPGs or indie sprite-based games, but rather instead working within limitations and yet maximizing potential to its fullest. I can't help but admire the fact that the game looks the way it does, but was made in RPG Maker 2003, and yet also seems to be very aware, self-aware of the limitations presented as seen with frame skipping that could occur, especially in the case of butterflies, birds, and all sorts of small little particle effects happening all at once in an age-old program that might have not been meant to handle so much, but yet it still does, almost seeming like maybe that maximized potential is exactly what is missing. They say that when one limits themselves, they are prone to be more creative within those limitations. And while this isn't always true, the thing is, it does push for creative ways to make things possible within such limitations. Beloved Rapture is a game that wants you to walk outside into the sun and appreciate the nature all around you, to appreciate what you're seeing, what you're hearing, what you're smelling, what you're tasting. It actually didn't cross my mind at first that this was made in RPG Maker 2003, until I then had a sneaking suspicion when I was talking with the developer. Of course, you actually might realize it when you realize you're stuck to keyboard controls or while you're controlling your character, but graphically there is a lot going on here. When you look at the level design and how things are structured, they have an imperfection about them, something that doesn't always make them feel like it was made in RPG Maker where you're working with tiles and grids. It's there and yet it isn't. You know, you look at a bridge and you're like, okay, clearly tiles, but then you look at the graphical design and you're like, but it feels lived in. There is some RPG Maker jank and a few glitches here and there that I did encounter. However, the developer has been made well aware of it, and they have recognized that these are definitely glitches and they're going to be trying to fix them before the game, releases and whatnot. However, it's also very easy to be forgiving of unconcerning glitches as the ones I encountered in the game. Nothing game-breaking, and just something you would expect with RPG Maker, because when you're doing super advanced scripts and changing animations and all that kind of jargon, you're gonna eventually run into a few issues here or there. Now, I know I haven't gone into gameplay yet, and I'm not going to go into the gameplay yet, because one thing that really does not get appreciated, no, not even appreciated, people appreciate it, but one thing that doesn't get covered in any form of depth or anything is music. And I think that's partly because not everyone grew up as a musician or had a chance to learn music theory in school. As a result, usually in reviews or to consumers even, they only have their ears and feelings to go off of, and to them it'll only sound good or bad, or they'll like maybe how certain instruments were or certain parts of music were, but there is a deeper understanding that comes from having knowledge of music theory, composition, etc. A little bit to my detriment, while I had a really great start in music as a jazz musician and started doing video game music with friends, in my own little band and everything, unfortunately, I didn't get to keep up with that work once I started going into medical life. So please forgive me for not using terms such as, oh, the music at this point engages in the pentatonic scale to give a sense of unease, Or how doing a C major 11 with a flat 7 gives a completely different vibe than a C major 7. Though perhaps it's also to the benefit of the mass viewer who might not have music theory as their background, and thus perhaps it'll be easier for me to communicate exactly what it is I'm talking about. Let's start off with the first battle theme. It actually has this kind of anime vibe to it. How do I describe it? I mean, at the same time, reminding me of when I rented Power Rangers on the Super Nintendo back in the day. Especially the bass, which, you know, keeps people in key and in rhythm. It's a common groove, but it's a good one. A really big thing in music also is answer and call. When you use answer and call in music, it's a very good way to help the listener not only remember the music, but it's just something that's very sound. You know what I mean? The use of answer and call, or question and answer, is very prevalent in music. That's my question, and then what I respond, you know? It's very nice. But also, let's go into the chorus. We got this anime opening vibe. You know, the thing about anime openings, and even just, you know, Japanese music, or some music in general, especially very melodic music, is that they tell a story. This is like the moment in an anime opening where they'd show the bad guys or something, right? We have a little bit more tension in this chorus. And now we have a little bit of a transition. Oh, this is in, that's a polyrhythm. Like, I think that's in 3-2? No, or maybe 5-3. Ba, ba, ba. No, 3-2. Ba, yeah, 3-2. Ooh, okay, so now, if I remember correctly, we're actually going into a solo section. Yeah. I think solo sections are maybe one of the best things you could add to your music. If you know Legend of the Heroes Trails in the Sky, like, the battle theme in there is something I really wish had a solo section. Because I'm a jazz crazy person, but you know. Beautiful. And then it transitions back. In fact, let's talk about additive rhythms, where you count in, you know, 4, and then you switch to 3, for instance. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3. Yeah, that's about it. So we're switching from a straight rhythm to a waltz rhythm for just a moment. Or perhaps it's 6-8. 2, 1, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. I love offbeat rhythms. I love strange rhythms. I love unique things. I'm someone who just can't do things in a very simple manner. I'm very inconsistent. Music should make you feel something. It shouldn't just be in the background. It shouldn't just be ambience. It can be, but the best kind of music is the one that makes you feel things. And this one makes me feel tense as heck. And using odd times, additive rhythms, or polyrhythms. You can hear the choir ahs in the background, the synth bass, distortion guitar coming in, and then Sawtooth kicking it off. MIDI instrumentation names. And why this music really works for a game like this is because of the back and forth nature of turn-based JRPGs and whatnot, you know? Or active. Especially in moments where you need to think for a moment, you know, where it just calms down for a moment. Oh, wait, there's something coming up. So, what we have playing right now, listen to the organ and the choir, and then we're going to be having a solo section coming up in just a second. And I like how the Sawtooth instrument that you're hearing right now just came in this really nice transition over to its own solo. It's beautiful. Very progressive. As in, like, you know, just the... It's, oh man, so good. And then hearing it join in the right? And then it repeats that, you know, remember what I said about question and answer? Bass is going crazy. I love when bass goes all over the place. That's the best thing ever. And the drums just absolutely killing it. Ooh. Nice flourish. Ooh. Ooh, piano joining in. But let's move on to gameplay finally. Let's finally talk about the gameplay over the mountain town Shenmue-like music. I mean, this just sounds a little bit Shenmue-like to me in its own weird way. Beloved Rapture does incorporate familiar elements for your veteran JRPG gamers. You do have 2 difficulties you can select from the get-go, as well as active or wait for your type of battle. Active meaning that the enemy will be attacking you while you're choosing things. You know, their ATB gauge will be filling up while your ATB gauge also fills up. However, on wait mode, the moment your ATB gauge is full, you have all the time in the world to select what you want to do. As of right now, active mode, I would say, is not in the best state that it could be, in my opinion. Essentially, you're at a complete disadvantage in which you are unable to do any form of selection when the enemy attacks you. When its animation is active, you are unable to be active at all. Regardless, you have your usual attack command. However, there's a little caveat to your attack command. Every time you attack, you fill a little blip on a gauge, which allows you to use Relica abilities once it's completely full. You'll actually see your character gain this little level 1 thing on their portrait, as well as their animation will change to note that, hey, you're in a kind of like super mode now. This lets you use a Relica attack, which is a very powerful move, physical so far as we've seen. Now, while you can cast magic and that costs just whatever amount of MP, Relica instead costs a percentage of MP. Just something interesting I thought I'd point out. Items are rather familiar here, from your healing and status healing items to your buffing-based items, where you can buff your strength or magic for an amount of turns. However, one interesting thing, I know I talked about graphics first, and I'm just bringing it up here because I talked about items, is that all the items in your inventory are actually sprite graphics. Like, they're not just a text that says, here's a potion. They're icons first before their information. And I just found that really cool. It's, you know, I appreciate it personally. It's very artistic, it's very pretty. In fact, the menu of the game, the menus in general, even though it's like, well, this is just, you know, Super Nintendo-ass looking spritey graphics, the thing is, it's stylized, because this is RPG Maker we're talking about here. So someone had to put this all together and intentionally make things look this way and work this way. In fact, when you look at the guide for the game, the guide is also a book that flips pages at an FPS that you would expect for a Super Nintendo game. It's not entirely smooth, but it's also consistent with the subject matter at hand. In fact, in battle, you actually have really smooth sprite animations, but you could say this is a bit like Final Fantasy VII, where you have higher poly models and whatnot during the combat. One other interesting thing to note with combat is also when you defend, you have this Legend of Dragoon-like mechanic. In Legend of Dragoon, when you block, you recover a small percentage of HP and negate some physical or magical damage. However, here in Beloved Rapture, you only negate physical damage specifically, and you only recover health once. If you try to defend again, the character will just simply defend, so the game encourages you to either take more of an offensive strategy, or cast a spell, or even use an item. Then after that, you'll be able to use the defend option and recover HP once again. Just not twice in a row. Oh, and no, you do not negate status effects like Legend of Dragoon. It's a very interesting and perhaps a more balanced way to use such a mechanic. I'm usually one for let the player be as powerful as they want. JRPGs are for everyone. But at the same time, I have to appreciate that this does prevent monotony. Fire at me, so it's probably pretty warm. Yeah, chilling it actually did do more damage than casting bolts of lightning, which, you know, their bolts of lightning are kind of hot, right? I did play the game in the classic mode difficulty setting, and I actually still have not got to experience the game in story mode. However, it's supposed to be reminiscent of RPGs, the classic mode difficulty. However, when I think classic RPGs, I think of how easy the Final Fantasy series is. I mean, okay, technically you could get really badly pwned in Final Fantasy IV, but even then, I don't think I was taking as much damage as I was in Beloved Rapture. However, even though my characters were nearing death in a good chunk of battles, they weren't in any danger since I was able to usually just heal them the next round, not once I have to revive my characters. So perhaps it is very similar to old RPGs. Of course, gameplay isn't just an element within battle, but also outside battle. There's a fishing minigame. It's pretty cool. You should try it. But let's go even further than that. Actual just walking around, running, and exploring. There's a gameplay element to actually exploring your environment and searching for treasures. You can jump down from cliffs and ledges, and you could even push rocks to get to some treasures, which also play a part in solving some dungeon puzzles. However, I will say the swimming does need to be sped up, in my opinion. This swimming is really, really slow. What's here is simple enough to understand and very approachable, and yet still having mechanical depth. I'm a person who loves mechanical depth in my video games, usually mostly with action games and whatnot, but hey, you know, in an RPG, all the better. And considering that the Relica system does have a level 1 symbol on the character portrait, that does make me wonder if level 2 is going to be a thing, and what will that bring to the table? However, I'm sure all of you have been waiting for the story, right? I mean, I did leave it for now because, you know, maybe some people don't want to be spoiled, and I'm actually not even here to really spoil any story, per se. In fact, I'm here to talk about the story in a more roundabout kind of way, so don't worry about spoilers here entirely. In fact, I may use some form of analogy and example to speak of the story. And I'll start off with a little story. When I was a kid, I remember always going to EB Games back when it was called that, before being changed to GameStop, and I would always look at the PlayStation 1 games because they were cheap and affordable, and I always saw Xenogears. I remember seeing it in the store and also in a magazine advertisement. I was like, what is this game? Like, I see a mecha, and I see these cool character portraits and, you know, little sprites and all that. Like, it looked really cool. And I felt like I had to know what Xenogears was. And surely enough, one day I finally got it. I wanted to discover what it was, because I remember there was some person we knew, some neighbor, friend, or someone who had emulated very early, and I thought Xenogears was a PC game because of that, and it turns out it wasn't. And that was my first introduction, so I was looking for that game that had the martial arts dude beating up the weird looking enemies and the wolves, and surely enough, I found it. Oh, and also stepping on food. But Xenogears is my baby. Xenogears changed me as a person. It made me seek answers, not just in video games, but in life. It made me think beyond, and also to read between the lines, to think deeper than what should normally be thought. In fact, it's led to an issue where curiosity sometimes gets the best of me, and I go into the little details of things rather than paying attention to the big picture, or rather just getting straight to the big picture. In fact, I guess that's what I'm doing right now. What I'm trying to get at is, just like Xenogears, Beloved Rapture makes you appreciate nuance and a slow burn, a very, very slow burn. The game's not going to give you the answers you want. It's just going to hint at them. It's going to let you think about them. It's going to let you theorize about them. But it's not going to give it to you like candy so easily. It will shock you. It will do things to you. It might even seem a little familiar, but there's definitely more than meets the eye when you try to take what information is given to you and put it together, because you're going to be wondering, wait, how does this all play into each other? And that's an important thing with storytelling. If you really want your story to be engaging, you don't want to give away your hand, like, you know, card talk, right? You don't want to give away your hand immediately and let the player know what's really going on right in the get-go. When I was speaking with the developer, they had described a certain element that I had brought up to them, and they said they wanted to keep it low-key. You know, once again, I bring up a slow burn to something they took passion in, but they also didn't want it to be any focal point of the story because, you know, it's more of a bonus, if anything. Something that if you read between the lines, you'll know, right? And they rather want the story to be front and center because they want this game to have a broad appeal. They want anyone to be able to enjoy the game regardless of what they like or what they don't like, and be able to engage with this game for what it is rather than a small little element of what it also is. Like I said, I'm talking about the story in a roundabout way as well as other elements of the story in a roundabout way. You also can make decisions. I'm not entirely sure what those decisions may have consequences for or lead to, but I made decisions. I have not checked what the other decisions do, unfortunately, so I can't really give much information there. But let's just say this game is not entirely for the faint of heart. In fact, one element of graphics that I did not even bring up at all was the fact that the game actually has bloodied sprites. I'm talking like, you know, if you've played Final Fantasy, you see a dead character, they're not going to have blood on them or something. You know, it was kind of unexpected back then, I feel, in my opinion, to see an RPG game where they actually, you know, bloody their sprites. But here, we actually have some pretty gruesome scenes, dare I say. And seeing them in sprite graphics, there's just something that hits really different. Of course, if you've played horror games, then you know what that kind of looks like, but it's just different here because you wouldn't expect it with a JRPG. So do be warned, there are some very bloody scenes. Now, of course, not like actual bloodshed, just the aftermath. Oh yeah, this one, yeah, like I said, the scenes are pretty strong in this one. Of course, you know, if you look at a game like Final Fantasy VII and we talk about the infamous blood trail left by Sephiroth in the Shinra building, I mean, yeah, sure, but like I said, this hits differently, and it really makes characters or antagonists seem that much more frightening. Sure, Luca Blight from Suikoden 2 is a complete dick, but like I said, it hits really different when the bloodshed and gore is made in a very specific way. I know I brought up reading between the lines, and I feel there's definitely quite a bit of reading between the lines here. Just a little bit, so far. I think there'll be even more as the game goes forward. I could be wrong, but, you know, the thing about being low-key is it hits that much harder when a reveal is made, or when you realize that something that someone was saying was actually meaning one thing over another, or perhaps it meant both, but the only way you'd know that is if you've actually played more of the game. It's kind of like a time where you really aren't telling your parents something, and you've been hanging out with this friend for such a long time, and they know you've been hanging out with them for a long time, that you both get along, and one day you're like, hey, I'm gonna be maybe, you know, moving in with this friend of mine, so, you know, just letting you know, Mom. And then Mom's all like, yeah, that's fine, honey. And then you're kind of shocked for a moment, but then you realize that maybe she knows, and she read between the lines. And she read between the lines! Beloved Rapture is a JRPG I want to see gain notoriety and appeal. It really hits incredibly hard towards the end of the demo before Chapter 2, and I really so badly want to know what happens, but as it goes into the start of Chapter 2, it leaves you wondering what will happen. The developer is very much aware they're going to be competing against games like Sea of Stars or even Chained Echoes, which have been hyped up to no end. I like those games too, but what Beloved Rapture has that those two don't is that it's actually designed in RPG Maker 2003, or rather to say, it doesn't have a feeling of new to it. It doesn't seem like a new Super Nintendo feeling game, if you get what I mean. It's not having HD pixels, it's having old pixels. Where other JRPGs have done a higher fidelity SNES kind of look, but, you know, far more pixels rather than less, Beloved Rapture is actually embracing that style and its limitations completely, and just trying to maximize what it can do within those limitations. Beloved Rapture even limits itself to older sound design. You could hear it in its sound effects, as well as its music, which is very SNES inspired, of course. And Beloved Rapture does have another element, which I'm not going to really go into out of respect for the developer. While that element was something that brought me in or even made me notice the game in the first place, made me find it in the first place. In fact, dare I say this element, while it could be completely beneficial to the sales of the game as well, beyond, in the entire ocean that is indie JRPGs, this element is the very reason I found it in the ocean that is indie JRPGs when combined together with that element, that searchable element. However, in a world such as this one, I will not say what that is. Aaron T. Crawford made the choice to not advertise that aspect as much as they probably should have, but you know what? It's fine. They want their game to be appreciated by the masses after everything that they've devoted to it. It's an element that deserves to be shown, but that is fine that they don't make it front and center. That is fine that they don't advertise that as the one thing to separate it from others, because what matters in a JRPG is how the story also moves you. The gameplay is a good part to keep you going through the story. The music is something to draw you in. The graphics are something to convey the power of the story, but even more so, the story itself. How the story touches you, how the story connects with you. What you even learn from the story, even if it's not applicable to life. And no matter what elements appear in the story, which will just naturally occur as a fact of life. Just something that writes itself. The fact is, this is a story they want to be appreciated. This is a story that they want to move people. When you put all your passion into making a video game. No, not when you put all your passion, no. Making a video game is hell. It is absolute hell. It is all passion and possibly no payoff. Anyone who makes a game puts themselves into that game, and if they make a mark on history, heck yeah, amazing. And if they don't, well, that's just how it goes. But just like The Princess Bride, when that movie came out, no one actually knew about it. In fact, it was ignored mainly because of the title, or at least that's what the everyone on the team and the actors believe. But then, according to said actors, VHS happens, word of mouth happens, and bam, popular. But it also comes to people like myself, people who have the power to even mention the game to another, whether it's by word of mouth or like I'm doing right now, a review, which I have not done reviews in such a long time since my old channel. By this medium of delivery, we can help those stories be seen, help those games be experienced, and such a massively inflated market. I don't know. This is something that really grabbed me in a very similar way to Xenogears, honestly. I'm not saying the main character has to go through trauma and depression and suicidal ideation like Fei Fong Wong, who still, I'm not sure if I've even seen a JRPG protagonist go through the motions that Fei had to. There probably must be one, and I just haven't played it yet. But there's something really moving here for me, and I think it's just that the mystery that I encountered within the story that made me asking questions as to why, or even what's the possibility that not all is as it seems. It really just has me curious to see what we're gonna see this 2023 for Beloved Rapture, because that's still the date of its release, and I'm hype. I am really hype. I think this one might be a first day buy for me, because I just need to know what's beyond that demo. But if there's anything that you take from this review, just go and try the goddamn demo already. After work or school, wherever you go, just like I did, just even if you have half an hour, just know you can save this game anytime and continue, but try the demo. It runs off of RPG Maker 2003. Your toaster computer or gaming computer or whatever kind of computer you have can handle it. You don't need any kind of controller. It only has keyboard controls, and the controls are very simple. You can explore around the starting area you begin in before you decide to go to the objective, and reward yourself with treasures and little things that you could just find lying around, and there's even sub-quests to do. But I'll get off my soapbox and leave it with a big recommendation to play the demo for Beloved Rapture. Have a good day or night wherever you are in the world.